Hello, everyone. This is a Livable Future podcast and the first episode in a two-part series exploring global partnerships and climate action. We're talking with two scientists from the Yeah Network, which prepares students to participate in international climate negotiations. Hi, my name is Cody Sanford.
And I'm Kaydee Barker, and we are the co-creators of the Livable Future podcast.
Today's Earth Day and a big day for climate negotiations. President Biden is hosting 40 world leaders on a climate summit, and the U.S. said that it would cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. It's big climate news.
Yes, and leading up to today, it was exciting to hear that Mr. Kerry from the U.S. met with Chinese President Mr. Xi last week, and the two countries have agreed to work together to reduce emissions before 2030. Together, the U.S. and China account for 43% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. So that's pretty big.
You know, that really highlights how important global partnerships are. It's a global problem, and it's going to take the global community to learn, adapt, and find creative solutions for the climate crisis.
For sure. To explore the importance of global partnerships, Cody and I sat down with two scientists from the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education Network, or the Yeah Network for short.
Before we go further, you should listen to this discussion. Wait, is it yay or is it yeah? It's both. Or
I think it's
I don't know.
One of those like tomato things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah is helping students studying environmental science participate in the international sphere to empower them to address complex global environmental problems through a transdisciplinary and transcultural lens.
The Yeah Network has embraced the move to online learning by hosting 3 virtual conferences. This allows students to present their research to each other no matter where they're at on the globe. It's pretty sweet. Dr. Gillian Bowser is the principal investigator of the Yeah Network and associate professor at Colorado State University and is thoroughly immersed in the multicultural dynamics of climate negotiations. Sarah Whipple is a Ph.D. candidate studying with Dr. Bowser and has attended multiple climate summits as a part of the Yeah Network, both of whom sat down to discuss the creation of Yeah and the importance of cultural context in climate negotiations.
So, Dr. Bowser, when you were coming up with the Yeah Network as a solution to getting students to think in transdisciplinary and transcultural terms about environmental issues, was there some sort of aha moment when you decided how you would approach this goal?
Not really. I mean, writing a grant is probably anything but an aha moment. As Sarah can now attest. I mean, you really have to slog your way through to create the platform for an aha moment. So I like to think our goal in YAY is to bring you students together to have an aha moment. You know, so that's what this new conference that we're trying to get funded is all about. It's, you know, our job as the professors is to open the doors and allow you students the opportunities to meet interculturally and to meet, you know, as institutions and to have your own aha moment. But the grant itself is the mechanism to provide that opportunity. And I think that's, you know, my personal experience is those are grants. That's really the purpose of a proposal and funding, is to create the opportunities for an aha moment. Even whether it's an invention, a vaccine or whatever, you're writing the vaccine to do something, or writing the grant to do something, and you're hoping for an aha, but you don't write a proposal on an aha, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So YAY in part formed itself by trying to think about, wow, we all really think about these things really differently. And how can we help our students get to that kind of exciting space? And it is exciting when you realize that countries simply think about things differently, and understanding where your culture plays a role, and then how we have to value everybody's cultural perspectives to get to an environmental solution is just so important, because everybody's perspectives do matter.
Dr. Bowser goes into more detail on the teaching philosophy of the YAY Network.
I think the best mentoring approach, especially because technology is changing so fast. And I know Sarah always gets the giggles because I'll suggest something and I have absolutely no idea how to use it, but I figure, wow, this is going to be great. Go figure it out.
That's funny.
But I think my job is to see the potential and open the door and get out of the way. And I think those are actually 3 steps of mentoring that we need to do now more than ever. And partly because this generation, so to speak, is more hyper-connected. So the opening the door and getting out of the way is really a part of the process. Citizen science, the potential of citizen science is amazing. To open the door to allow students to use citizen science to answer all sorts of questions is, something, that I can do as a scientist. But then I need to get out of the way because the technology is changing faster than my own mindset. And in citizen science, this is a particular problem. And we usually talk about this in class. I don't know why we haven't this time, or we talk about with our students that we take into the field. But, your cell phone has changed dramatically. I mean, so dramatically, it's sort of scary how fast it's changed in the last couple of years, in the last 5 or 10 years. But the one most important change is, and I probably won't get the story quite right, but it's based on a woman who drowned in her car. I don't know, you guys may know this story. She drove a car off a bridge and was calling the police dispatchers from her cell phone. And this is quite a while ago. Not actually all that long ago. But the police dispatch couldn't locate her. So she died. And the family had this act that was named after her, which I'm drawing a blank on, which is a simple fact that your cell phone always knows where it is, whether you choose for that to happen or not. But when it gets to citizen science, it means I can accurately place species on a map in space and time. So now I can start asking other questions. The minute I can know where that species is in place and time accurately, you can ask all sorts of questions based on that occurrence of species. And the second thing is that, your cell phone takes pretty amazing pictures, really amazing pictures. So taxonomic detail that you can get on a cell phone is just eye-popping. What we can do with our cell phones is scarily close to what we can do with a macro lens on a camera, and getting closer by the day. So a big DSLR camera that we use in the field can still get better depth of field than a cell phone is, and can still do better light than a cell phone, but cell phones are getting close. So that means we can get taxonomic detail to accurately identify species in the field. So why do we need to get out of the way? Because taxonomists still don't believe in cell phone data. They still want to argue about whether species can be accurately identified from pictures, or what a specimen, versus just maybe we train people for what they need to take a picture of to begin with. And so that's a lot of what Sarah does. You need to take a picture of the face, or you need to take a picture of the upside, the lower side. You need to get these sets of pictures so we can identify the species with a picture. But a lot of taxonomists are very resistant to that. So you see a lot of resistance to using citizen science data as a way for inventory and monitoring. But we need to use it. We cannot answer a global question without global sets of eyes on it. So that's a long answer. But Sarah may have a different answer on those 3 things.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to mentoring the next generation of scientists, my philosophy is really that I am not, a leader or someone that's telling them what to do, but that I am engaged and learning at the same rate and experiencing the same opportunities, and doing the data collection, doing the analysis, whatever it may be, on the same playing field, because I think that really promotes a level of teamwork and collaboration, and it leads to a lot more of an equitable team, where everyone feels like they have a voice and they can focus on their personal interests and really be the best team player that they may be. And so, as I look forward to eventually graduating and hopefully having, a lab of my own where I can continue to mentor students and so forth, I really see that, being at that same playing field and having that compassion for all of the hurdles that students may have to jump through or experiences that they may have to be involved in order to get to their long-term goals, and sympathizing with that and helping where, as Gillian said, opening the door and then getting out of the way, I think is really important. But being at that same level of understanding and being willing to out of leadership and effort is really important as well.
Next, we shifted to talking about the future.
The easiest answer is, I would say eyes wide open. I think the more that we can train students to be aware of their own cultural heritage. I don't necessarily like the term privilege, but whatever your cultural heritage is, and that can be very complex on how you ended up with whatever cultural heritage you got. But recognizing that and celebrating when each of those heritage of your colleagues and friends might be a little bit different. Because, and I think that's what Sarah was alluding to, when you get to an international negotiation, you cannot avoid the heritage issue and how people approach issues. Gender is a great example of just trying to understand how different countries approach the gender issue is absolutely fascinating. And as I always tell students when you get to a COP itself, and like we say a lot in class, the coalitions you expect are not the coalitions you're going to see in the COP. Who bands together over gender issues? Who bands together over fisheries issues? It's not what we're sort of taught in the United States about, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a very different cast of characters, and it changes depending on the issue. And so if we can create a future group of students that are perfectly comfortable at working across those multicultural spaces to understand that the preservation of the species, whatever the word preservation means to you, is the paramount importance. So it doesn't matter where the mangrove is growing, it's that we need to preserve it, but how we preserve it will have cultural connotations with it, and understanding that each culture has to address that preservation question in its own nationally determined ability, and celebrating that. And I think that's where YAY needs to go, and that's where I'd hope the students who graduate from YAY are really comfortable, whether it's working with our rather crazy colleagues down in Australia, and being able to joke with them and have friendships across those divides, and or working with a colleague in China and understanding that they're coming from a different cultural heritage space than we are, but may have the same common goal of trying to preserve a bumblebee, and just trying to figure out how to navigate those spaces with grace and respect for all those different cultures and how they talk, and be respectful of all those.
Dr. Bowser details what it's like to find an international community who cares about climate action.
At the international stage, it actually is super cool to discover that community. And I think Sarah has discovered a little bit of that. And we'll sort of see why, for some of us, it's very easy to get addicted to that. And addicted probably is the correct term, to that ability to be in a thoroughly multicultural space, where it reminds you to think about your own perspectives of something that is ubiquitous across all of our boundaries. Species don't see boundary signs. They don't know what, they can't read. But we tend to forget that. We act as if all of our species stops at our borders, and that how we conserve a species has to actually cross borders. But we also need to understand what the term conserve means when it crosses into a different culture. It can be very different, and we just don't even think about it. And we certainly don't do a great job of training our students about it. And where that becomes a tension point is when you start to look at something like sustainable development or global environmental agreements. And that's part of why in the class we assign everybody to different countries, and because you want students to try and think about, wow, this country really doesn't think about conservation the same way I do. It's not a right or wrong. It is simply different because they're a different culture. And giving the power of the culture to understand how people conserve things and why people conserve things is so important. And that because we don't conserve everything, we conserve things that culturally we decide to conserve. And it's important to understand those differences because the ecosystem may think something totally different is important to conserve. I mean, we don't have a conservation, society for the preservation of annelids or even nematodes yet. But ecosystem-wise, they may be the most important thing to conserve out there. So just to share a story, when I was in the National Park Service, that we used to have, and they still sort of have, I don't know if anything survived post-COVID, Park Service exchanges, where you would exchange people from different national parks worldwide. So when I was at Joshua Tree, we hosted a bunch of rangers from Australia. And it was super cool not too long ago to go back to Australia and meet up with them again and see, where they were at and what they were doing and that kind of thing. We also we have a sister park program where parks partner with sister parks in different countries and then exchange personnel and rangers. And part of the idea is just to understand what people do, in conservation of parks as a common thread. So we were on an exchange program with China, looking at a park called Duchayan. I'm probably mispronouncing it. I should know by now, which is in the central part of China near the Tibetan border. And so we come in as the National Park Service in the U.S. and we claim that Yellowstone is the world's first national park, and everybody likes to brag about that. And the national parks was America's great idea, blah blah blah, and off we go. And we run around saying we've got the best parks. And Australia always likes to point out that Royal Park is older than Yellowstone, but never mind, we ignore them, and still go on to claim that we're the oldest park. And never mind that Yellowstone's actually not the oldest park, but Hot Springs, Arkansas is even older. So we all show up from Yellowstone to China, and we're in this park in Duchayan. And in the visitor center walls of this park in China, on the walls, they have a list of every species that occurs in that park in 2 different languages. So the walls are simply covered with this enormous taxonomic list. It's kind of eye-popping when you go walk in there.
Wow.
Everything is on the walls of this park. So finally, one of my colleagues, and you walk through the trails of this park, and this is crazy, and the trees have their birth dates on them. So all the trees have these little signs from when they were born.
Wow.
And we're talking 300, 400, 600 years ago on these damn trees. So finally, one of my colleagues is like, so when the hell was this park founded? And the guy's like, 1050 BC.
Oh my goodness.
We were so out of scale in terms of what
1050 BC.
It was founded by one of the emperors as a public pleasuring ground, which is technically our definition of a national park. It has a Buddhist temple that was abandoned 1,000 years ago, but it's still there. But the park was actually founded as part of a floodplain, and it's famous for this flood irrigation, this natural irrigation system that's set up that manages itself, that was built 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago now, by one of the Chinese empires, and still operates to this day. So, but the whole point of that story is this issue of perspective, of understanding what we think of conservation is very much, we being Americans, is very much only 100 years old when we think about Darwin discovering anything in particular. But other cultures, their view of conservation is vastly different. Just look at our new Secretary of Interior and just think about it for a second. So the new Secretary of Interior introduced herself as a 35th generation New Mexican. Let's think about that number for a moment.
I know. Deb Holland, that's going to be amazing, hopefully.
Yeah, but 35th generation. Long before anybody of European descent even thought America existed. And I think her point was that, and it was so well said, is that knowledge about conservation is very deep in different cultures and not so deep in other cultures. And for us to get to a common understanding of global conservation, we have to acknowledge those different depths. It's not right or wrong. We simply have to acknowledge it. and then work across those spaces to figure out, okay, what does conservation mean for the global community? And I think that's the power she brings in by that simple statement that I'm a 35th generation. Just count the years backwards and figure out where you were. And Columbus certainly wasn't even born yet, or maybe, or close. But it gives you that sense of conservation moves in a very different space in very different cultures. And we don't think about it. Or the conservation of flies, we probably couldn't get that very far. But I think it's important to understand that when you get into the international stage. Thinking about the depth of Chinese culture being in the same place that we really don't give credit to, given our current relationships with the nation of China. But many of the parks in China are extremely old, and some of them are managed now as gardens. So what is the difference of the conservation of a garden versus the conservation of a park? We assume we know that in US terms, but we don't know what that means in Chinese terms. And for us to get to sustainable development, which includes the protection of parks and protected areas, we need to understand what the word park or protected area even means in different countries, in different contexts. And that's what YAY is all about. It's just to give you the opportunity to work with people. And yes, we're very US-centric because of our funding source, and sort of stuck with that for now. But at least get you to think about that, wow, this means something different in a different culture. So you can't separate out clean water from education in some cultures, and we kind of get that, but you can't separate out education from fisheries in some cultures, and we don't always get that. And I think that's what YAY is about. It's trying to help students get that in different countries, you can't separate out their education from no hunger, from access to protein, from fisheries. But in the US, we do. We separate those. We don't think about fisheries as anything to do with our education system. Because if you go to school hungry, you can't learn. And if your primary source of protein is fish, and you lose fisheries, you go to school hungry and you can't learn. So I think it's just that thinking through those processes at a worldwide set. So that was a very long answer. So let Sarah jump in.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, kind of echoing what Gillian just touched on, seeing the action of, international negotiations and seeing negotiators discuss the IPCC reports, for instance, is transformative experience for, I would say, anyone. But for me, when I was able to see that for the first time, there were just so many kind of emotions and thoughts, and going back to that motivational aspect, kind of like the why you are engaged in a discipline like environmental science, seeing that firsthand and feeling the emotions and so forth tied to those types of negotiations is, I would say, quite an aha. And I think it's amazing that Gillian, as the lead PI on the YAG grant, as well as all the other institutions involved in this project, are doing the students quite the service and providing such an amazing opportunity to see those experiences and feel it and understand it firsthand, so that you can be motivated to engage in that space yourself. And so I guess I'm just very appreciative of all the opportunities that YA has provided myself thus far, and will be forever grateful of that. And I think there's only room to grow as to how many more students we can get engaged in this space to really make a difference when it comes to climate action and the science degrees that students are currently engaged in, but maybe don't know how to act on, long term.
This was the first of a two-part series exploring the YAY network and global partnerships. In the next episode, Dr. Bowser and Sarah explain how everyday people can get involved and how they found a passion for environmental science.
If you'd like to learn more about sustainable development, please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and on your favorite social media platforms. And now we want to end with these wise words from Sarah Whipple.